Welcome. You're listening to The Weather Lounge, a podcast by WeatherWorks. Get ready to explore the world of weather and connect with engaging guests, bringing you fun and thought-provoking stories of just how weather shapes our lives, sometimes in ways you've never imagined. So, join us as we unravel the mysteries of the atmosphere. Today's episode starts right now.
Hello there, and thanks for joining us in the Weather Lounge. I'm meteorologist Brad Miller, and joining me for today's podcast is fellow WeatherWorks meteorologist Mike Priante, also our favorite producer. And also joining us today is tropical specialist Steve Coppertino. Gentlemen, thanks for stopping by here on this day before Independence Day.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be back.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Good to be back here in the podcast. Of course, I am always on the podcast, editing, on the producing side of things, but excited to talk a little bit about weather and, of course, talking about Hurricane Beryl. That'll be an interesting topic here.
You know, our last podcast, we had Davis Klein on from the New York Racing Association. We were talking about just horse racing and weather in general, and the changes to Belmont Raceway since they're holding the actual Belmont last year or this past year and next year at Saratoga Springs. So today we're going to kind of shift gears and go back to just more of a general weather conversation. And Steve, let's start with you here on this again. It's July 3rd. And we're talking about a pretty strong hurricane. And mind you, just this past Monday, we had our monthly seminar here for WeatherWorks, which keeps us up to date on any education and keeps us kind of in tune with things. And who would have thought that we'd be talking about a Category 5 hurricane just a couple days ago in June at that time, which is now July 3rd.
Yeah, I mean, Brad, it's absolutely insane. I mean, I still can't believe it's real. What's happened over the past week? It's Beryl has broken so many records. It's really impossible to keep track of. I mean, I have a handful here to kind of rattle off real quick. I mean, it was the easternmost hurricane to form in the tropical Atlantic in June, breaking the old record set back in 1933. It's the first major hurricane in June east of the Lesser Antilles on record. It's also the earliest Category 4 hurricane on record in the basin, breaking the previous record set by Hurricane Dennis back in 2005. Um, Additionally, it's the earliest Category 5 hurricane on record, breaking the record set on July 16th,
Wow.
2005 by Hurricane Emily. And
So a
also
full 2 weeks basically since we had the earliest one. Jeez.
and also breaking the wind speed record for July. I mean, 1933 and 2005 are widely considered two of the most active years on record. And just one last stat. I mean, if this one kind of blows my mind a little bit, if we were to not have a single storm form in the next month or so, we'd still be above average from an ACE perspective, which is just how meteorologists measure how impactful or how intense storms are.
Yeah, that's crazy to think. Yeah, a month from now we're into early August, and we've already accumulated enough ACE, like you said, that would still be above normal just from Beryl. We did, of course, had Alberto and a 12-hour Chris, I think, but
Yeah,
they
we had some shorties this year,
yeah, but
but
they
I
didn't
mean,
really lend to the accumulation of the ACE as much, of course, as Beryl.
no, not at all. I think Alberto was like half an ace point, and then I don't even know what Chris did, but I can guarantee
It
you
might
it
not
was
have registered. It
probably
was so
less than
short.
that. Yeah.
I was kind of shocked that Chris formed. When I looked at it, I was like, oh, wait, Chris? Like, I just saw remnants of Chris from the National Hurricane Center, and I said, wait, they
Yeah,
formed Chris?
it
Like,
was
how
fast.
quick was that?
Yeah, so I mean, it was decently organized. It's funny when it developed. That's when Beryl was really starting to explode. So there were some rumblings that the Hurricane Center was a little busy, but they may go back in the postseason and kind of fix the time it formed. But yeah, it was another short-lived system for sure.
All right, so let's talk about Beryl here and what's going to happen going forward. This podcast being recorded July the 3rd, it's going to have the most impacts on Jamaica later this afternoon. And then beyond that, Steve, a lot of it's going to be dependent upon how strong Beryl can stay. The long-term track, of course, we have the National Hurricane Center, which we all use as guidance also. But, there's a lot of different models out there, too. It's kind of flip-flopping with what's going to eventually happen. So let's kind of talk about that going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, what happens with Jamaica over the next 12 hours, it's really going to be a whole butterfly effect what happens through the weekend. Um, so if Beryl goes over the island of Jamaica, and Jamaica has some pretty serious mountains to it, so that would work to disrupt the circulation, cause it to weaken, and there's still a really really good amount of shear around in the Western Caribbean, so it's pretty unlikely that it would be able to re-strengthen before hitting the Yucatan, and that in turn would likely just cause a weaker barrel to head west into Mexico by about Saturday or Sunday. However, if it stays south and it's able to maintain right now, as at the time we're recording this, it's 145 mile an hour category 4, so pretty intense system still. But if it remains south, there's a good shot it can still remain north and track into a less mountainous area of the Yucatan
Right.
Peninsula.
Spend less time over land as it crosses the Yucatan. Yeah.
Exactly. And the environment once you get into the Gulf really isn't that bad. In a stronger storm, pretty much anywhere across the Atlantic tends to drift a little bit more to the north. Um, but something we've also started to see in the last 12 hours, there was forecast to be a pretty substantial ridge over the southeastern United States. That's trended a little bit weaker as well. So we've seen model guidance shift a little bit more to a northerly track, uncomfortably close for the South Texas
Texas
coastline
coast.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, if this stays weak, there's a good shot it stays south. But if this does stay strong, I mean, northern Mexico is certainly in play, but we could see shifts into the Texas coastline over the next 24 hours or so.
Yeah. So, like you said, that strength though, as it comes towards Yucatan, is going to be, it's going to let it, let the storm go further north or south, basically, as it comes towards the Yucatan.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, right now the official National Hurricane Center forecast has Beryl making landfall, I believe, to the south of Cancun, but just basically across that coastline. I think as a strong Cat 1, low end Cat 2. So we'll see as Steve said, if depending on kind of how this plays out, because again, right now the actual landfall is just south of Texas as a tropical storm. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, and that's one thing Steve and I were talking about earlier. That the Hurricane Center did bring it back to hurricane status briefly after it crossed the Yucatan, which in previous forecasts, the last few days, it kept it just a tropical storm after the first landfall or it could be second landfall if it's Jamaica, but or really third with the outer islands. But regardless, what it's saying is that it's going to probably hold itself a little bit better together, and that's why it maybe can become a hurricane again as it approaches Texas. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of question marks going forward. Unfortunately, a lot of those folks are going to have to really, be on their toes going through the holiday weekend, and that's no fun. I mean, you got the big Fourth of July weekend, and folks in Texas, unfortunately, got to watch this, because they may be having to prepare for, at least a tropical storm, which can be just as bad as in itself with flooding as we round out the holiday weekend going into Sunday and Monday.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, one of the hazards here, especially going into the holiday weekend, everyone's going to be at the beach. That's really not being mentioned enough is the swell. I mean, you're going to
Rip
have some
currents and
pretty,
swells.
yeah, you're going to have some pretty gnarly wave action in the Gulf of Mexico. So folks certainly have to be careful this weekend. Um, and it doesn't matter how far the hurricane is. You basically have a large look pretty much imagine it as like a bowl of water heading out from the hurricane, and it just really cranks up those waves. So it certainly can be dangerous.
And like you said, the flooding aspect too. Even if you're not in the direct path of Beryl, and we've seen this, all the time with storms, especially, even let's just say the center goes across like southern Texas near Corpus Christi or something, or south, or even I guess south of there, maybe somewhere between Corpus Christi and Brownsville. That northern extent of the heavy rain though is going to reach pretty far north.
Yeah, and that's
Just
actually the same area that was they got a pretty good amount of rain from our first storm there too, Alberto. So
Alberto, yeah, yeah.
it's certainly I mean, even like you said, even if it's south, it still could be a pretty significant impact to that area.
And like you said, Steve, all the some of the ensembles, some of the big, the models, the GFS, the Euro, they're all kind of been trending further and further north. So, I mean, the weaker ridge, it makes sense. So maybe if that southeastern ridge can strengthen a little bit more, then it is shoved further south back into northern Mexico. But again, somebody's going to unfortunately get, a lot of rain and wind from this storm. So you don't really wish that on anybody, but it's just the way it is that somebody's going to get it.
So I have a question here. So going back to the ensemble forecasting and a couple of the tracks that have a little more north, I've noticed at the end of the runs, and this actually started yesterday, that a lot of them have it almost kind of like making a north, but then a curve, kind of more so like rounding out the Gulf Coast from Mexico through Louisiana. I guess what in terms of if this southeast ridge does weaken to the point where it allows something like that to happen and you have Beryl stay over the waters longer,
Yeah, I never
like
thought of that.
what could be the threshold here? Because obviously we have landfall as a tropical storm. I mean, could this potentially ramp back up? I mean, worst case scenario here to maybe a
That could be an extra 12 to 18 hours over water. Yeah, I know what you're saying, Mike. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So I don't know what we could be expecting, but I mean, this could. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Thankfully, only a handful of these ensembles that we're talking about are showing that right now. Some of the American model, they have more of a right track into Texas and even up to Louisiana, which is a little aggressive right now. But if Beryl does spend more time over the Gulf of Mexico, I mean, sea surface temperatures are still 30 to
Yeah,
31
there's not
degrees
much shear in
Celsius.
there either.
Yeah, and the environment would be pretty favorable. So I mean, there's really no telling how strong it could get. This storm has a history of rapid intensification. It would really just depend on how much of an impact the Yucatan has on it. If it emerges with a decent core and it can reorganize at a decent pace, I mean, it could become quite strong again. I can't say how strong, but it would be a very serious situation. So I believe the National Hurricane Center and the National Weather Service are going to be collaborating and releasing even more observational balloons across the southeast, and they're going to be doing
Plus, you got hurricane reconnaissance going in there every 12 hours
exactly,
or even more so
exactly.
as it gets closer.
So we're going to try and get as much data as possible into the models and really try and hone down on the situation over the next 5 days.
Well, yeah, it'll be a watch and see thing. And again, it's hard to believe it's early July and we're already talking about a storm of this magnitude. And with the forecast going forward, it's supposed to be a very active season, which of course we're forecasting here at WeatherWorks as well. So I mean, unfortunately, the sky may be the limit, and we're not even close to the even getting into the peak of hurricane season, which is more so mid to late August and especially in the early September. So
Yeah, yeah, it's I mean a lot of people were wondering sea surface temperatures are running, I mean across the Atlantic, but especially in the Caribbean are running typically what they'd be in mid late September. They're even higher than some years have peaked in the past. So a lot of people were wondering, what that would do. And apparently you can get September hurricanes in June and July with that kind of configuration. So I mean, one storm really isn't an indication of how the season's going to play out, but it certainly makes me a little bit nervous for how the next, 3 or so months are going to go.
One more last thing to talk about before we end this little section of the podcast here. Anything to look forward, or I guess to look at over the next week or so? I mean, behind Barrel, anything that's a kind of a, because I know we've been very active, but I know there's another wave that came off of Africa, and there's one that's headed toward the Lesser Antilles again. But anything that we should be watching besides Barrel heading over the next week or so?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there is a wave. It's designated as 96L. It's moving through the islands right now, the same area that Beryl hit, unfortunately. Thankfully, it's not really doing anything more than some gusty winds and additional heavy rainfall. There's a low shot it gets a chance to develop, but being in close proximity to Beryl, it's kind of getting sheared right now, and
man, it could be going over some waters that got upwelled by
yeah,
Beryl.
exactly, exactly. So, I mean, conditions aren't all that favorable, but I wouldn't be shocked to see a brief tropical storm or something like that come out of it.
I guess if there's anything good out of Beryl, it did churn up the Caribbean pretty good, and there's going to be, it's going to take a little more time now to get back to those sea surface temperatures. I mean, it'll eventually do it, but it got mixed up down there pretty good.
It'll take some time to recover there. Beryl was kind of in a Goldilocks spot. You had large scale rising motion over the Atlantic. That usually takes about 3 to 4 weeks to kind of circulate across the globe. Um, it was right in that area with record sea surface temperatures and all that upward motion. And we saw a ton of thunderstorms develop that are unusually intense with Beryl. And, what happened happened. Um, what usually follows that upward motion is large scale sinking. It suppresses thunderstorms, enhances shear. You get much more sal or dry air coming off of Africa. So hopefully we look to stay quiet over the next 10 to 14 days. But once we get back into late July or so, that's when I think we can start to see things pick up. And much like last year, I think once we get to the middle of August, that's when things really, really ramp up.
Yeah, we
And
get a
they
4
may
or 5
just,
named storms at once out there.
yeah, I mean, the sky's the limit come mid-August, and it may not quiet down until October. So, um, for now, we have a brief quiet period ahead, but we'll see how long that lasts.
All right, yeah, great. Thanks again, Steve, for joining us, and we'll definitely do an update either with we'll have you or we'll have Kyle Leahy on. He's also one of our long range and tropical specialists, along with Kevin Winter. So again, thanks for you guys for all you do here at WeatherWorks as well.
No, thank you again for having me, and looking forward to coming back soon.
All right, sounds good, Steve. So, Mike, let's you and I chat a little bit about the upcoming holiday weekend here. More so, the weather that's going to be impacting everyone from day to day. I mean, it's July 4th weekend. It's going to be hot. It's going to be humid. The big question is people want to know is it going to rain? Is it going to mess up my fireworks? So, I mean, it's very spotty the way it's going forward here for most of the Northeast and Mid Atlantic.
Yeah, I think the one thing to kind of maybe tell people right now is that, at least for the 4th of July here in the Northeast and the Mid Atlantic US, is that it's not going to be a washout by any means. We're not looking at cloudy and rainy all day. It is going to be hot and it is going to be humid. And I feel like that's been a theme here the past 2 weeks. We've had, besides that one week where we had like multiple days in the upper 90s, we basically had no one week has not gone without a day in the at least in the mid 90s and heat indices nearing 100 for many places. So that's the theme for the pretty much the majority of the summer here going forward. If you haven't listened to our podcast, we did go in depth in our summer outlook, and basically it's going to be hot and humid heading into August here. So certainly on point. But yeah, no, basically I think the 4th of July is not going to be a washout by any means. But like you said, Brad, there's going to be watching for some, I guess, natural fireworks, if you
To
will.
to be expected. I mean, don't anyone cancel plans. But again, you need to have that alternate, I guess, shelter or a place to go because there are going to be storms around. It's not like it's not going to happen. But most areas should be fine. But there are going to be a few of those storms that pop up, after 2, 3 o'clock. It just goes with the territory this time of the year. You're going to have those hot, humid conditions, and that's just going to lend to those afternoon storms to pop up here and there. So um, it's like I said, Friday, and then Friday itself, for the most part, looking okay as well. There could be some issues late in the day on Friday. And into Friday night, there is going to be kind of a warm boundary, if you will. Not really a warm front because we can't really say that in the summer when it's already in the 80s and near 90, but it's almost like a dew point advection setup as we go on into Friday night and Saturday. So there could be some areas down like around the Mason-Dixon line, even southern PA, southern New Jersey, down towards DC area that may have a little enhanced area of some heavier rainfall possible as we get into late Friday night.
Yeah, I think the Friday into the Saturday time frame is going to be interesting. Originally we were thinking here, especially at WeatherWorks, that Saturday could have potentially been a decent severe day. But I think based on the timing and the way this front is kind of setting up, first of all, there's a ton of moisture with this. I mean, pe- Precipitable water, which we use to calculate how much water is available in the atmosphere, is measured in inches, and some places could get over 2.5 inches, which is you're getting into tropical like territory with those kind of values. So, I mean, there's certainly going to be a potential for some pretty good downpours, tropical kind of torrential downpours, during the day on Saturday. But again, a lot of this is going to focus its attention, like you said, Brad, mostly from like DC to Philly. I think like the northern part of, like New England, upstate New York, maybe Northwest Jersey into PA. I think they might escape it Saturday. Maybe they have some lingering stuff, but like the afternoon may not be nearly as bad. But if you're 95 corridor, New York City south into like DC, I mean, you're going to have to watch out for showers and storms at any point during the daytime. So, not a great day if you're trying to get stuff done in the afternoon. It certainly may not be the best of
Yeah, I
days.
would say Saturday, yeah, would run the greatest risk for any kind of like things that could ruin, outdoor activities, or at least you'd have to be a little bit better on more on your toes in those areas, like you said, from DC to Philly and South Jersey. Maybe other areas are just more on the spotty side. But again, this is based on that front speeding up. That's why we don't think it's going to be as active as we first thought. But maybe this front slows down a little bit, and then we go back to a better chance for severe, maybe even further north. So it's just the basic weather things that we have to watch from day to day. So
Yeah, and if we want to round out I guess the unofficial holiday weekend, because it falls on a Thursday this year, so you have that weird Friday in between, that I'm sure a lot of people probably took off for. But Sunday originally looked like it was going to be potentially also rainy in those same areas in the 95 to DC, but I think the front might have enough speed where it mostly gets off the coast, but I would say if you're certainly at the shores, Delaware, the Delmarva up through Jersey, and maybe even into like maybe eastern end of the Long Island and the Cape. I mean, I would certainly keep an eye out because there certainly can be more showers and storms that linger. But on the northwest side of this, Brad, we might actually get into some drier, less humid air mass that gets in, and it might be a nice end to the weekend.
gonna be a nice finish to the holiday weekend for 80 to 90% of the Northeast and Mid Atlantic. And again, it's just all gonna be dependent upon that frontal placement. Like you said, if it has enough oomph to get off the coast far enough, then everyone stays dry. But if it kind of you know lingers and just doesn't have enough push, and it kind of just meanders somewhere, like you said, along the coast, immediate coast, then those areas, unfortunately, the shore areas may have the better risk of any kind of shower and thunderstorm activity. So.
Exactly. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, Brad. I don't want to go too deep into next week, but obviously there's going to be some things to watch out for. And
Yeah,
also,
front may be the focus again. It may kind of back up a little bit and provide a new focus for heavier rainfall along I-95. So yeah, I was looking at the same thing.
exactly. And after that, I mean, it seems as though we start to see things kind of dry out a little bit and there's not as much next week. Although I guess the other caveat is, and we really can't tell at this point because we're basically kind of pulling hairs here, but whatever Beryl does. And, now granted, we're not talking anything nearly as much as Beryl.
No, but some of the moisture and some of the tropical rains could get entrained into the area based on that frontal boundary, and yeah, it could all just kind of pull up some of that moisture. So
Exactly. So right now, I wouldn't worry about it, but certainly if you hear in the next week or so, if let's say Beryl does take more of a northerly track, as we were hinting at potentially with the Southeast Ridge building, I wouldn't be shocked if mid of next week, maybe later end of next week, there's talk of the remnants of Beryl being kind of pulled in. Again, nothing crazy, but certainly wouldn't be shocked if you hear that in the news or even online, people talking about it. But that could potentially throw a wrench into things with next week's
yeah, it gets
forecast.
caught up in the westerlies eventually, and it has to go somewhere. And
Exactly, it has to go somewhere. And usually these systems either they kind of go west and kind of run into that dry air mass and die out over Mexico or like the southern plains, or they kind of get pulled north and east. I mean, that's kind of with the jet stream; they kind of have to go east. So eventually, this is going to do one of two things. But yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on it for sure.
all right, well, I mean that's a nice little kind of package deal here. I just want to kind of get an impromptu podcast out here before the holiday weekend. Again, talk about Beryl and what's going to happen with that storm going forward, and of course, just a quick update on the Northeast corridor, I-95 going down into the Mid Atlantic. So, In a nutshell, it's 4th of July. Just a couple of things to watch, and we'll kind of just take it from there, and hopefully just everyone can stay mainly dry.
Yeah, looking forward to it as well. If you're interested as well, a lot of this information that we've talked about kind of comes from a product we have at WeatherWorks called Weather Risk, which essentially is a combination of our original product, which we still run in the wintertime, called Winter Risk. That's a lot of the things that we talk about with potential for snowfall and more geared toward operational uses for snow and ice contractors. But if you're interested in potentially our weather risk, which runs not just through the winter, but of course through the summertime, highlighting temperature, precipitation outlooks, and basically just giving you an idea of how weather can impact your operations or even just your day-to-day activities. If you're interested, you can always email info@weatherworksinc.com and potentially can get an idea of what to see there.
So I think that'll be just about it for today's episode. And don't forget, you can always follow us on social media and Facebook, Instagram, X, among other things. What else we got out there, Mike? We're covered in all places, right?
Well, we're everywhere, Brad. So I mean, I'm sure they'll hear about us anywhere. But yeah, no, it's good talking to you, Brad, again, and we'll see everyone here on the next episode.
That's a wrap on this week's episode of the Weather Lounge podcast. Thanks for listening. Be sure to follow us on all your favorite podcasting platforms so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have questions or comments? Just email us at weatherlounge@weatherworksinc.com. We'd love to hear your feedback. You can also learn more about our parent company, WeatherWorks, by visiting weatherworksinc.com and checking them out on social media as well. Thanks again for joining us, and until next time, stay curious and stay weather-wise.